Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live on our how-to series. Excited to be back and excited for this topic we have for this afternoon. Some of you may be curious that how do you actually run a 15-minute QBR? Not only can you do it in 15 minutes, but there's this format that really captures executive attentions. So I have our expert here today, and so please welcome me to joining Andrea Bumstead. She is the founder and CEO of CS Impact. Welcome, Andrea. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. And I'm sure we'll get into the nitty-gritty of your firewall framework. I mean, I was super impressed when I heard that it's gone, used over by 5,000 people in the worldwide. So we'll get into that. But maybe you just want to tell a little bit more to the audience about yourself and your journey in CS.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here. I am always happy to talk about the 15-minute QBR. As Mina mentioned, my name is Andrea Bumstead. I am the founder and CEO of CS Impact. We turn customer success or customer strategy into a revenue engine for your SaaS business, which means retention, expansion, strategy, and making sure that customers get value and business realization from your products or services. Prior to that, I was actually a two-time vice president of customer success. I've had a lengthy career in customer success, and prior to customer success, I was actually in sales and marketing. So I've always been on the go-to-market side. And like I said, I'm always happy to talk about the 15-minute QBR.
Perfect. Well, sounds like you've had a lot of sort of commercial side of experience, and I take it that this 15-minute framework is a little bit around that as well, to create that buy-in from your executives. Tell us a little bit about how you came up with this, because I'm pretty sure you could trademark this now, that given how many people across the world use it already.
Yes, it's amazing. I'm actually known now for the 15-minute QBR. People will say like, "Oh, you're the creator of the 15-minute QBR." So it all started actually a little bit by accident. I was training a customer success team, not on QBRs. I was actually training them on how to run commercial negotiations. So they were handling renewals. And at the end of the training, a CSM said, "How do I get executives to show up to my QBRs?" And I sort of thought, yeah, like I hear you. I've had that problem. I've had that problem on my own teams where we couldn't get executive attention. We couldn't get executives to show up. And so I sort of paused and I said, "Why don't you just run that meeting in 15 minutes?" And she sort of looked at me like,
alien.
"Are you crazy? How would I do that?" And I said, "Okay, just hear me out." I said, every executive has time for a 15-minute meeting. So if you can't get a meeting, they always can make time for 15 minutes. And actually, most times an executive will come into a meeting and then they'll say, "You know what, I've got to drop early. I only have 15 minutes." Right. And so I said, "Why don't you just run it in 15 minutes? And I think you can. And here is how." And so just sort of off the top of my head, I said, "You know what? You really just need to cover the value that they're getting today. So what is the value that your product or solution has delivered? How did they get more value? And what are 3 recommendations?" And I said, if you can cover just those 3 things in 15 minutes, that will be a valuable conversation for an executive, one that they would want to have, because it basically answers, well, why should they purchase or continue to use your solution, right? Like, why should they continue to spend money on it, all through the lens of value? Here's the value that you're getting. Here's how you get more value, and 3 recommendations.
Yeah, I love the work that you do in threes, because that's a known statistics of how people also are able to process information. So also hits all good psychological notes. But what would you say if someone doesn't know what value you can deliver from your products? How do you start from that? Because obviously, I guess that's the the fundamentals that really start in your conversation as well.
Yeah, this is a great question. And in fact, this is where a lot of organizations actually stumble, believe it or not, is that they have paying customers, but they don't fully understand the business problems that those customers are looking to solve with their products or services. And they can't connect the dots between like how the customer is using their product or their service and the value that they're actually getting as it
Mhm,
relates to their business outcomes. So this is a core challenge that I hear is just like how do you make those connections? I
mhm.
actually have a slide I can show on this.
Yeah, yeah. Shall we? Let's have a look at your actual 15-minute presentation and how you would start creating this. So really excited to see what the framework looks like.
Sure. Yeah. So why don't I start with the framework and then I'll go back and sort of address your question of like, well, how do you know the value that you're
You know the
actually
value, yes.
delivering? So this is the framework. It's really simple. You just touch on the value the customer or the client is getting today. So you want to use data and insights to really show that value. And that can be if you're a marketing organization, that would be like increased qualified pipeline or improved lead quality or increased conversion rates, right? So whatever is specific to your customer, the problem that you solve, the value you're delivering, if you can quantify that, right? And of course, you want to reinforce how your product or service is solving your customer specific business challenge. And then next is how do they unlock more value? So this is where your expertise really comes into play. And I always say, like, as customer success leaders and as CSMs, no one is talking to more customers than us. No one has more insights than we do. And so this is where you can really talk about how your customer or how your client can get more value. And you can do that through leveraging customer benchmarks and best practices, right? Sharing how similar customers are maximizing their impact with your product or service, and then identifying any gaps where your customer or your client is leaving value on the table. So, how do they unlock more value as it
Mhm.
again relates to their strategic sort of business priorities? And then lastly here is like what should they do next? So you're the expert, right? You're the one that works with a lot of different customers in their space. You're the expert on your products. What should they be doing next to unlock more value? And this is where you want to offer like three actionable next steps, and talk about how they can increase the value that they're getting. So you're making recommendations and you want to tie that again to your customers' business strategy. Does that make sense?
It does. So, oh, if I was to look at that summarization on the next, what they should do next, it's almost like you're weaving in your upsell here into a certain degree, would you say?
Absolutely. Yes. So oftentimes when you're talking about how a customer can get more value, what they should be doing next, this is where you are seeding your upsell or your expansion, your
Mhm,
additional products, additional features, add-ons that would help them unlock more value, but always related to their strategic business priorities.
mhm, mhm.
It's not meaningful to a customer if it doesn't tie back to what they're looking to achieve.
Right, right. So I love this framework. It's really clear. What are you doing today? How could you do it more? How can we better at it? But obviously that's your slide on a page, but there's probably a lot behind how you actually get so good at that you can replicate and scale that across all your clients. So I think you've got some tips for the audience here on how to get about getting to a point where you can literally just tell them the three things. So maybe you can share more about the implementation process you would recommend.
Yeah, I actually jumped the gun there and I accidentally advanced the slide while you were talking, but I'm how you implement the 15-minute QBR. This is like the most asked question I get, right? So companies will approach me, CSMs will approach me, leaders will approach me, and they will say, I love this framework. Where do I start? How do I actually implement this? And this goes back to your question earlier, Mina, which was like, how do we know that we're actually delivering value? Like, how do we
Mhm.
actually measure that? How do we actually connect those dots? And so I would say first you need to understand the problems that you solve for your customer. Um,
Mhm.
so really understanding like their business, their priorities, but like what are the problems that you are solving as they relate to their business?
Yeah,
So you want to get a good understanding of that, document it, right? Ask a lot of like questions and curiosity because sometimes the problems that we think that we are solving are not actually the ones that we are solving. Meaning sometimes customers use our products or services in ways that we don't anticipate.
true. And that's one thing that they can do. And a lot of the times when I see, this isn't by no means a letdown, but I see feature list. I don't see the value list when we look at a product. It says can do this, 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 but actually translating it to what the outcome is. That's what you're saying here, if I'm reading your understanding correctly.
Exactly. Yeah, this is outcome focused. This isn't about the features of the product, it's about the problems that they solve, the
Yeah.
outcomes that it delivers.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So when you're
So,
measuring this, it's not the number of logins that you're getting, right? But it's what they're actually achieving by logging into your product.
exactly. Exactly. And
Perfect.
then the next phase here is like you want to define objectives and metrics. So, like, what are the KPIs that are actually tied to their value realization? Meaning, how would you actually measure that?
Hmm.
A lot of organizations struggle with this. They either don't have the data or they have some data, but they have no idea how that actually connects to the business problems that they're solving. Meaning, maybe they have a whole bunch of usage data, but they
Right.
don't know how that actually translates into meaningful business impact.
Hmm.
So, this is where you want to define objectives and metrics as much as you can measure that value. And when I say measure value, that's usually money made, right? Time saved, efficiency gained, right? Money
Saved.
saved, that
Yes.
like those big high level things that companies are looking to do. You want to be able to measure that as it relates to your product or service.
And here, what I'd love to see also, maybe your advice is that obviously we're talking to the CS audience here, and I hope there's other people from other walks of life as well. But this shouldn't be as just a CS thing, right? It should be a broader than that in terms of measuring the impact of your product, right?
Absolutely. Yes. So while this was sort of born out of customer success and we talk about quarterly business reviews, this applies to a lot of different industries. Any industry where you are effectively serving a client or a customer and trying to prove value and you're talking to a business stakeholder. Doesn't even have to be an executive stakeholder, but you always want to be demonstrating how you're solving a problem, how
Mhm.
the value you're delivering, how they get more value, and come with recommendations.
Yeah, fair enough. Sorry, I keep interrupting you, but please go ahead and
No,
finish.
no, no, that's totally fine. So the next one is you want to be able to track it. So you want to be able to track your customers' progress. So once you understand the problem you're looking to solve, you have metrics and a way to quantify that. You want to be tracking that. And this is where you can use a number of different platforms to track it, but you do want to be keeping track of the value that your customers are getting, how they're hitting those objectives or KPIs. Um, and then the next one is if you can benchmark your top customers, like what are your top customers doing? Like your customers that renew year over year that say like this product is amazing. What value are they getting that maybe some of your other customers aren't? Like
Mhm.
are they using different features? Are they using your product in a different way? What problem are they solving with it as it relates to their business. And so, as much as you can then sort of benchmark or have even an understanding of what good and great looks like, that really helps with the last piece here, which is building insights and recommendations. It's it's really hard to know what to recommend if you don't know what your best customers are doing and
Mhm.
how they are most effectively using your product. So these are the phases that I sort of recommend. You want to understand the problem. You want to be able to quantify that, right? You want to be able to track it, benchmark your top customers so you know what good and great looks like within your products and how you're solving those business problems. And then you want to build insights and recommendations around that so that,
Mhm.
like, no matter who you're talking to, this starts to sort of roll off your tongue of like, oh, okay, I can see this is the value that you're getting based on the problems you're looking to solve and the KPIs you have. What we know about our top customers is this, and here's how you get more value. And then here's what I recommend.
Great. I love it. And then how would you go about then presenting this out to the audience? Like what would you cover really when you are actually then sharing? Do you share all of it? Do you share just the kind of the recommendations? How do you evolve this in your organization?
Yeah, I mean, so you mean when you're actually presenting it to
Yes.
your
Yeah.
customer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once you have this sort of framework down of like, okay, what is the value that they're getting? How do they get more value? Three recommendations. You can easily put this into like a longer slide deck if that made sense. You can build this out. So I've actually seen people sort of take this framework and then build it into something that's longer where they're
Mhm.
going into in more depth, like the problems they're solving, the KPIs the customer is looking to achieve, um, how they get more value, where is the unlock, do you have additional products or services they could take advantage of? So, one, you can make this longer. You can always make this longer. Two,
Mhm.
you can keep it really short to this 15-minute, like you can even have just a conversation with an executive,
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
where it's just like, if an executive just asked you, hey, how are things going, right, with this product from your company? It's like, oh, well, this is the value that you're getting, and here's how I think you can get more value, and here's what I would recommend. So you can you can always go longer, right? You can always like go deeper on this stuff. You could add a value map, a success plan, whatever. But I really encourage you to try and keep it short and concise, so that when you are having just a conversation with an executive and you don't have a slide deck prepared, you have this framework of like, if I can always touch on these things, this is what executives truly care about.
It's almost a really a good mind map or in some way, Andrea, where it's like I want to move through these stages of what am I getting right now, what I think you should get more, and how here's what I recommend, so that you can keep the conversation very concise with the executives. Yeah. Now that everyone obviously is going to go want to implement this, what are some of your top tips on how you get it done in your organization?
Yeah. Well, here are three things that I recommend if you are looking to implement this. One is that you want to get leadership buy-in. This is a shift, right, in terms of how companies have typically had conversations, especially at the executive level. So you do want to get buy-in, right? And you want to really position this new format as a move from more of status updates to executive level conversations, right? And ones that you can have with anyone at sort of any time within the organization that you're working with. So once you have leadership buy-in, right? And this is more of an experiment, right? Where like you want to try this with a few customers, get a feel for it. I've seen organizations implement this at with their top like strategic enterprise level customers. I've had organizations implement this with their long tail SMB customers where they're like, we just want to be able to talk to a lot of customers at scale, and we need a really simple way to do that.
Mhm.
So you want to sort of pick a segment or group of customers to experiment with, right? But first get leadership buy-in, and then two, you want to equip your team with this framework, train your team on how to deliver this concise QBR using, right, this framework of like impact, potential impact, next steps, right? Or like value realized, value they could be getting, three recommendations. You want to train and equip your team to have these conversations. And then three, as I mentioned, you want to pilot. Start with a small cohort, a group of customers. Maybe you start with SMB, maybe you start with enterprise, sort of depends on your business. But you want to experiment with this, right? To see how it lands, and also see where maybe there are gaps. Like maybe you truly don't know the value that your customers are getting. You haven't been tracking that. You don't have a way of measuring that. Maybe
Mhm.
you don't have a great understanding of how your top customers are using your product or service and what's different. So you want to pilot, you want to learn, and then you want to start scaling.
Beautiful. I think the last piece, like the build, measure, learn kind of scenario of going around to understand what is the missing piece, because well as the obviously the framework itself is very exactly easy to comprehend that this is what you should be doing. It's still gonna have to get some background really to know how you can prove it, right? I think you talked a lot about that tracking and measuring in your previous slide, right?
Yes, yes. And you can do that through success plans, through value maps. If you have enterprise customers, you can do that very simply with SMB customers in your customer success platform, or in even Salesforce. But the point is you need to have a way of like tracking the value that your customers
Mhm.
are getting as it relates to some sort of business metric KPIs, that you can actually measure.
Yeah. In the age of AI, how would you say that could help you in getting this ready?
Oh, so I love a good AI hack. In fact, I am constantly experimenting with how to make this really efficient with AI. I would say the key here, there's two key things to leveraging AI, with this, but a lot of solutions is one is the data. So you need to have that data
Mhm.
in terms of like, what are the business problems you solve? Now, with your SMB customers, I often get asked this question of like, well, we're not, we have 4,000 long tail customers. We're not going to go out and ask them the business problem that we were looking to
Right.
solve. Like, we just can't do that. And I always say that's okay, because your products and the problems you are solving for your customers are finite. They're not infinite.
Mhm. Mhm.
Meaning that if you can sit down and sort of map the common use cases, how your product is used, how it
Mhm.
is typically measured, that is okay for your long tail customers. Right. So if you can be tracking that, if you have data against it, if you can layer in usage data, whether
Right.
they're taking advantage of certain features, your telemetry, if you can layer that on top, you will have a sense of like, one, the problems you're solving, how you're actually solving those problems. If you have enterprise customers, you can track this in success plans, value maps much more extensively, right?
Yes.
But once you have that data and those insights, then you can very quickly pull it into a framework, a dashboard, even that, like,
Mhm.
oh, here's the value that they're getting. They've activated these things. This is how it aligns to their business outcomes, right? And all those use cases. And then based on our best customers, here are all the things that we would recommend that they do next, right?
Mhm.
And then here are the typical sort of three recommendations that we would have. So there's lots of things you can do with AI, and then you could pre-populate a deck, right? This simple
Love that.
framework, pre-populate the deck if you wanted to. So I actually work with a number of companies to do exactly this, which is implement it. So figure out the problems they're solving, the data
Mhm.
they have, connect
Mhm.
it all, leverage AI to pull this all into a deck or a presentation or a dashboard that then a CSM can just pull up, really, really quickly, and have this conversation with pretty much anyone within their customer organization.
Yeah, so they can already just literally pull it out. So your prep time again becomes minimal in terms of being able to do all of these conversations at scale, right? Is there anything else you would recommend people? Like what are your sort of learned pitfalls to avoid on while you start thinking this through?
Yeah, the biggest pitfalls are usually if you understand the problems that you solve. It's amazing how many companies don't really
Mhm.
understand this. It's kind of a black box where they're like, we have a lot of customers and we have this kind of usage, but like we really don't know what this means. So the more that like CSMs can ask curiosity type questions, right? And the more data that you can gather. And when I say curiosity type questions, it's like, you know, what are your strategic business outcomes? What problem does our product solve for you? What made you want to purchase it in the first place? What are you looking to achieve? And how would we measure that? Right? Like how would we actually
Mhm.
quantify that? Or what would success look like in 6 months for you or a year from now? And how does
Mhm.
that align to your strategic priorities? So just like I always say, like if your CSMs can be asking really good questions, and if you're not from customer success, I mean anyone in an account management level who's
Mhm.
talking with a customer, you just want to ask really good questions. You can even feed all of those insights through AI and say, like, what are the top challenges that we are solving for our customers? How do they typically measure that? As long as you ask the right questions, you'll come out with the insights that then help you build this model of like, here's the value that you're getting. Here's how you get more value. Here's what we recommend.
Yeah, and I love that you said let's run it through and really understand the problem, because I think it also should feed earlier in the sales process back to your background. It should really be the same. This is what we're selling, and this is then actually what we're delivering and measuring, and that's a cohesive story around the value throughout your sales and customer success journey ultimately. Love that, Andrea. That's super good. If anyone has questions, we still got a few minutes with the master Andrea, who has created this super framework, which is so easy to understand, and I love how you've explained the implementation process. So to join the conversation, we'll get to your questions in a minute. What are some of the things that has proven for you that this really works? Like, again, talking about outcomes and values, could you share maybe a story of how you've seen it really work in an organization, and how you've seen the buy-in come through from that?
Yeah, the biggest proof point I have is that executives will actually show up to this conversation. I mean, taking
That is
this
a
full circle,
great.
right? Is like when you tell an executive that you can actually have this conversation in 15 minutes, they will show up because they're like, well, one, none of our other vendors can do that. Two, I'd like to see you actually do that. And three, I have time for a 15-minute meeting. So like I'm there, I will show up, right? And so that is the biggest proof point that I've seen is that executives do actually show up. And look, I said you can always elaborate on this, and you absolutely can. It's harder to go condensed like this and high impact. It's so
Mhm.
much easier to elaborate once you have that executive's um, attention. You can go into longer slides. You can have a more
Mhm.
fulsome conversation. You can create a value map and go through an operating and an engagement model with them and really get into the meat of like what you would cover in a longer sort of QBR. It's the fact that like executives are not showing up to these QBRs because they're a waste of their time, right? In fact, when I was a vice president of customer success, vendors, so the vendors that I was using would want to have QBRs with me. And I declined them all because I was like, these are a waste of time. And then I would turn to my team and I would say, how many QBRs have you had this month? Right?
Ironic.
Like, so we know that these are high value conversations. We want to
Mhm.
have them. We measure our teams on them. And then executives don't show up because they're low value. So the biggest proof point that I've seen is that executives will show up.
That is a beautiful outcome, right? Because that's what you want. You want the buy-in from the executive saying this is working, and you should keep buying us, right, for future.
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. All right, we've got a couple questions here. Katie's asking, do you recommend having this 15-minute QBR with the decision makers before the in-depth QBR with the team? What would be your order?
Yeah. So, I mean, think of this as a tool in your toolkit. Okay. So, if you're having trouble getting to your executive stakeholders, then you might try running the QBR in 15 minutes. Um, if you can get access to the larger team, maybe you do just have this executive conversation first, and then you have a longer QBR with the rest of the team, right? So, just think of it as like a tool, right, in your toolbox that you can just like sort of pull out when you need it. So it's like if you only, let's say you're at a conference, right, and your executive sponsor is at that conference and you finally get to talk to them, well, like come ready with like, what is the value that they're getting? How do they get more value and what would you recommend? Just have that in your back pocket, right? So just think of this as like any other tool where it's like if you're having trouble getting these conversations, you're at a conference, you only get a few minutes with your executive sponsor. If you're just ready and armed with this, you can use it sort of however it sort of makes sense. And you can always run a longer QBR. In
Yeah.
fact, I work with organizations that will use this as a hook to get that meeting, and then still run like a 90+ minute QBR when they have the executive's attention.
Yeah, and that's could be more of a planning session, and then like let's put those recommendations into action. So once we get that nice buy-in from there, great, thank you. Jana's asking, what CRM do you use for customer success? I think we probably have about a million that we could recommend between the two of us, Andrea.
Yeah, I've used quite a few, and I will say they're all a little bit similar and a little bit different, right?
Mhm.
And there's also some very interesting competitors coming up in the space too, traditional CRMs, right, that can go across sort of your CRMs and generate insights based on AI. So there's a lot of really interesting things happening in the market. I mean, my short answer is you need to use the CRM that works best for your business, whatever that is, or whatever solution that is,
Mhm.
right? But in terms of recommending one over the other, I think it really just depends on your business, your budget, what you're looking to achieve, and the types of data you have access to, and what you would like to track.
And I think also add in there the stage that you are at, right?
Yes.
Something if you have early stage, maybe a more lightweight. If you are, got a complex needs, then, have a think about that side. We've got a nice messages from Alexandra saying to get your champion to help with relevant execs to the table for 15 minutes. You can guide them that talking about the value achieved so far, you're naturally taking them about being thanks to the work you're putting enable the engagement and activity. That is so true, right? You're actually now thanking them also for their business at the same time. So yeah, keep questions coming in if you have more. If we don't get to all of them, Andrea, I'm sure you'll be happy to connect on LinkedIn. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit how to find you if people do have more questions. I'm sure they'll have plenty of follow-up questions when they start thinking about this.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, I can share my screen again. I'll just put the QR code up on the screen here. You can just use your phone. You can grab that. You can connect on LinkedIn. You can also just search for my name. There's really, actually, I think there's only one of me, which is super convenient. And I have like the hot pink sort of background, so you can easily find me. But feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can DM me your questions. If you are interested in exploring how to implement the 15-minute QBR in your organization, just send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat. I also have a Substack. I'm actually working on a how-to series on my Substack where I post long-form posts about how to do everything from forecast to map the customer journey to report into the CRO, turn your organization into a revenue engine. You name it is in there. So you can subscribe to my Substack. You can find it. It's called Real Talk with CS Impact, which is the name of my business. And you can also find me on Instagram. So this is a new one for me, but you can look up Customer Success Impact and find me on the gram.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Andrea. We will be finishing in a couple of minutes, but maybe you can just give us if you didn't take anything else away from this conversation, which I hope you have, what's your top tip, Andrea, for how to run a 15-minute QBR?
Oh, the top tip. Top tip is you can do this. I mean, it's you can absolutely do this. Executives do love it. They're intrigued by it. They're like, none of our other vendors can do this. If you can, you are automatically setting yourself apart from the other vendors that they are working with. I mean, just think about how many vendors executives have, the demands on their time, right? Like, there's a reason why executives tend to decline QBRs. It's because they're low value, because they don't have time.
Yes,
So if you can nail this in 15 minutes, which you absolutely can, and my clients, they do, you're automatically setting yourself apart. And again, you can always expand on this. It can become longer. The challenge is, can you make it shorter? Can you actually can be this concise? And do you actually know the value that you're delivering in a measurable way, and how your customers can get more value? And are you prepared to recommend things?
love that. Yeah. So keep it simple, right? Keep it concise and keep it punchy, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Super. Andrea, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for sharing this. I hope everyone that was on the call or listening or watching later will take up the challenge on concising your QBRs to 15 minutes. We both love to hear how you're getting on with that. And I thank you again for sharing that and talking through. And I know people will have more questions for you to follow up. But thank you everyone for listening today. We will be back at the end of April with our next how-to series. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, all.